Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Greater Good Project, where we're building an army and changing the world one conversation at a time. You can follow us on social media at Greater Good Pro. I'm your host, Donna, Saul, and today our very special guest is Josh Linkner. He's an entrepreneur, author, and thought leader, and he's joining us today to talk about innovation and why it's the lifeblood of all human progress. And before we start, I do want to thank Goodman Speakers Bureau for connecting us with Josh today. Hey, welcome, Josh.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. I feel like this has been a long time in coming, so thank you very much for your patience.
Oh, my pleasure.
So how did you get into, or how did you begin being interested in this whole field of innovation and creativity?
Well, interestingly enough, I've been a business person for my career. I started as a jazz musician, and I fell in love with the art form at a very early age, and jazz really was an incredible MBA education for me in business. And early on, I started to see how creativity was the driving force in music, and that in turn translated to seeing how it's become the driving force in business.
Interesting. I guess of all the things I expected you to say first, Josh, you being a jazz musician was not one of them.
Well, thank you. I really believe, too, by the way, that jazz has become like the new metaphor for business success. In the past, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was that of a classical conductor. So one person, CEO, stands in the center of the room, and it's all about getting everyone to play the notes on the page exactly as they're written. So the goal of leadership in that case was about precision and accuracy and alignment, compliance. But today, the world is so complex, and it's moving so quickly that we have to play music without all the notes in front of us. So my belief is that today we have to be more like jazz musicians. We have to learn to innovate in real time. We have to improvise. We have to make decisions in the face of ambiguity. And it's more about fostering these really vibrant, creative teams rather than building an organization of compliance.
So if you buy into this, and there's no reason why companies shouldn't, how do you do that? How do you put together teams that can run on the fly as opposed to hitting all the marks as they have in the past?
Yeah, and again, it's my own belief, but I strongly believe that in the past, this type of thinking may have been a nice to have or optional. Today, it's become mission critical. Yeah. I mean, to even keep up, we're in an era where these are required skills. The way to do it, interestingly enough, and I've studied this for years, the research is very clear that all human beings have enormous creative capacity. There's a real myth. Many of us adults don't feel like we're creative, perhaps because we don't play an instrument or something, but all of us as human beings are enormously creative. It's in our blood. The thing is that many of us haven't developed those skills. So for organizations, we need to create an environment that fosters those types of skills, gives people some practice, and also, here's the biggest blocker, we need to remove fear. So most people don't share ideas, not because they don't have them, it's because they're too afraid. And so if we can, as leaders, create environments that are safe, the ideas start to flow and the organization starts to progress.
What is it, fear of failure then? Is that what holds it back?
It can be. It's actually a bit more complex than that. So imagine if we're having a brainstorm session and, you got all these bosses and heavy people in the room. You might share your safe ideas, but you don't want to share your big, bold ones because you don't want to look foolish or you don't want to offend your boss, or you start thinking executionally, like who's going to fund my idea, or what if it goes forward and it doesn't work. And so what happens is actually our minds, and it's human nature, all of us do this, it becomes clouded with fear, and we tend to play it safe. So anytime as leaders that we can create an environment where no idea is shot down, we're not becoming the idea police, it's the opposite, we're fostering and celebrating innovative thinking, then success really starts to take root.
So how do you, if everybody is creative, how do you guide people in starting to unleash their creativity?
Well, the good news is you can learn the skill. You can really develop it in the same way someone would learn to play tennis or learn a new language. As I mentioned, the first thing is creating safe environments. The next thing is giving yourself some practice at it. For some reason, we believe that we should be able to snap our fingers and be instantly creative. But that's the equivalent of saying someone should, who's never practiced a sport should be able to snap their fingers and play in the Super Bowl. So again, we all have the raw talent, but we still have to develop those skills. And that's by applying it as a priority, sort of giving yourself permission to take time to be creative. And also, there's some real interesting techniques that we can do. Even things sitting around asking like that childhood game of 20 questions. When you're facing a challenge or a threat or an opportunity, it's very easy to leap to the obvious answer, the solution that everyone else has always done. Mm-hmm. But instead, if you start asking more questions about it, it invokes your curiosity and in turn drives your creativity.
Yeah, I think sometimes, we laugh about 2-year-olds, why, but sometimes that's the most valuable question to opening up a creative conversation.
Indeed, and the more questions we ask that, start with why or what if or why not, it really allows us to challenge conventional wisdom. It allows us to imagine what can be instead of just what already is. And the other thing I'll say real quickly is that too often we think of creativity or innovation as giant product breakthroughs, like inventing the light bulb, or Uber has changed this entire industry. But in that context, with that high of a stakes, it's very difficult for most of us to even think like that. My suggestion is to take the weight of the world off of our shoulders and think about little micro-innovations. Think about everyday creativity or everyday innovation. So it doesn't have to be this big, scary, overwhelming, bet the farm type initiative. You could be creative in how you run your Monday morning meeting, or how you call on a new prospective client, or how you draft up a proposal. So if you inject creativity as a daily habit, lots of little things instead of big, scary, overwhelming, giant ones, it really starts to become a practice, and you get in a rhythm, and in turn you start to drive real meaningful progress. So
have you had the opportunity, I guess is the best word, the opportunity to evaluate companies or organizations that are filled with creatives versus those that aren't? And can you speak to the differences besides the obvious ones?
Yes, and I'm so glad you said that, because when we say the term creatives, we think of certain roles. We think of the people in marketing or maybe software engineering or whatever. My argument is that we're all creatives, and that our level of creativity has nothing to do with our job title. So you could be a statistician and be wildly creative at solving problems. Maybe you don't paint art, but you could still be a creative person. So my belief is that all organizations are filled with all creatives because we're human beings and we are built to be creative. The difference, though, is that some organizations have a culture that fosters and supports and celebrates creative thinking, and other ones have a culture, many times they say it, but they really don't act it. Instead, what happens if someone shows up with an idea, they send them in the timeout, if it's not perfect. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's not so much does a company have creatives or not, because all companies are creatives if they have human beings. Yeah. The difference is how do you build a culture to support and foster that creativity to allow it to come on out to play.
Can you give us some examples of best practices from some of these companies?
Sure. Lots of them. One fun example, a company that I interviewed issues every year a Failure of the Year award. So they celebrate other stuff like the Team Member of the Year, et cetera, but they also celebrate the Failure of the Year. So this goes for the team or individual that had a great idea. The numbers made sense, they went for it, and it didn't work out at all. But instead of getting, penalized, they get a standing ovation. People are clapping and cheering, slapping high five, way to fail. And to me, it's not so much about aiming at failure. It's about a willingness to understand that, it takes a lot of challenged ideas to get to good ones. And very often, the real progress comes through a series of setbacks and mistakes and, yes, failures. And so understanding that those failures are the pathway to discovery. Think about the message that exercise drives deep into the DNA of this company about taking responsible risks and building a culture that supports the creative process.
Yeah, I mean, if you... oh God, what's the word? I'm totally losing my vocabulary at this point. But if you project that up, you have the joke about the epic fail because somebody tries to do something that doesn't work out as it's planned, but people can laugh about it and joke about it. I think it goes back to addressing your comment about one of the biggest prohibitors is fear. Because if you can laugh at it and you can celebrate it, like in the example that you've given, then it really removes that layer of fear.
No question about it. And the thing is that when you look at the big breakthroughs that we celebrate in life, we have this myth that it was a single lightning bolt of inspiration followed by mindless execution. And that is rarely how things happen. Generally what happens is, yes, there's an idea that comes forward, but generally it's deeply flawed. And only through a series of these micro-innovations, little adaptations and pivots, and yes, failures that you learn from and you keep tweaking the system, that's when real progress happens. So if we stop judging, if we stop layering on this overwhelming burden of fear and say, okay, it was just an experiment. Okay, what can we learn from it? If it didn't go exactly as we wanted, what can we tweak next experiment? And realizing that that's how innovation unfolds as a process rather than just a giant single idea that is perfect upon launch.
So what, besides fear then, what else prohibits creativity?
One thing is that we tend to mix the creative process into, it's really a two-step process, and people tend to squish it into one.
Okay.
So really the best way to think about it is step one is ideation, step two is execution. So if you think about brain science for a minute, the first part is all right brain, which is the creative, abstract type thinking, and then the execution part is left brain. The problem is we grew up, most of us, in a school system that is all about there's only one right answer and do what you're told and guess what the teacher knows and don't make any mistakes, worst thing you can do. So we have these highly developed left brains, logical, linear brains, and very underdeveloped right brains. So what we do is when we have a creative idea, we so quickly pounce on it that we extinguish the spark. And you've probably seen this. If there's 5 people in a room and one person has an idea, the other 4 become the instantly self-appointed idea police. And they tell you all this, here's all the reasons it's not going to work. Well, what we need to do is separate those two. In the ideation process, it's okay to have crazy, wild ideas. You can't worry about execution. You can't worry about funding. It doesn't matter if the idea is illegal, immoral, unethical. It doesn't matter. It's just an idea. So you really got to let your hair down on that one. Send your left brain out to get a coffee. Then, step 2, once you've sort of limited the field and you've got a few ideas that merit further exploration, then step 2, bring your executional brain, your left brain, back into the scenario, and yes, certainly evaluate them and apply rigor. But the problem that we often do is that we become overwhelmed with the executional side, and it extinguishes our creativity too quickly.
Yeah, but I guess at some point you almost have to balance it out. You know what I mean? You can't have the creatives running wild. While I remember being in meetings when I was doing big corporate work, and the salespeople would come in, the marketing people would come in, and they'd have these great ideas, and everybody's excited about it, and then the financial guys would speak up. It was just like squash. So I have seen firsthand what it is that you're talking about, but I've also seen both of them run unchecked. And so I think that it's a finer balance than people sometimes realize.
Yeah, well said. I mean, the title of my first book was Disciplined Dreaming. And I think you need both of those. And you're right. I mean, one of the fears that the financial people, you call them, point out sometimes is they think about creativity as this, unchecked, run amok, bet the farm, irresponsible risk-taking. And I would argue that you can be very creative in a very non-risky way. You can conduct lots of controlled experiments. You can look at it as a very, measured pace. You can be disciplined in your creativity. But to me, an organization has to have both of those yin and yang elements. If a company has too much creativity and not enough discipline, you have pets.com. If you have all discipline and no creativity, you have some giant stifling bureaucracy. And so I think the modern organization has to embrace both sides of that equation and let them, really work together in unison to drive a better outcome.
Yeah, it really takes a strong leader to be able to I think, balance all of that and make it happen and let each kind of department or each segment of the organization have its way with an idea or a thought for a period of time before it all gets balanced out.
No question about it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things I really encourage people to do is take the weight of the world off their shoulders. Innovation doesn't have to be this big, scary thing. And I really encourage people to think about micro-innovations or everyday innovation, where you're reimagining the little stuff, how you run your Monday morning meeting or how you send out a proposal, just like those little things that if you screw it up, it doesn't ruin the whole company. Yeah. And if you start to practice it as a daily habit, I mean, that's the other thing you're asking is, like, how do you develop these skills? It's through practice. It's not through once-a-decade big, scary bets. It's through lots of little stuff.
So it could be as simple as, changing up your route to work or changing where you go for lunch, and just little things that start to train your brain that it's okay to make changes that reduce the fear of your living in some respects.
Yes, exactly. We think too often in binary terms.
Yeah.
We're either going to be really creative, which comes with all these, scary fear-type things, or we're going to be not. And it doesn't have to be like that. It can be a little bit, You can say, I'm going to spend 5 minutes a day just imagining the possibilities, doodling, looking up from my computer. Instead of thinking about my to-do list, thinking about the possibilities for the future. And or like you said, take a different route to work. Or instead of thinking about, let's say you have an idea to better win a new piece of business if you're a salesperson. Instead of making a global, wide-sweeping organizational change that's mired in risk, just try an experiment. Try your new idea with 5 customers, and then try the old one with 5 customers and measure it. If the idea proves itself out, try it now with 10 customers. And if it doesn't, then kill it quickly. So, in other words, we can be creative in really little, small baby steps that aren't scary, aren't overwhelming, and we're still applying, the responsibilities to our organization and our families by not taking too big of a risk.
Yeah. Hey, Josh, we've got to pause here from our sponsors. I'm Donna, Saul. You're listening to the Greater Good Project. We're talking with Josh Linkner about innovation and creativity, and we will be right back. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Greater Good Project, where we're changing the world one conversation at a time. You can follow us on social media at Greater Good Pro. I'm your host, Donna Saul, and today we're talking with Josh Linkner. He's an entrepreneur, an author, a thought leader, and he's joined us to talk about innovation and why it's the lifeblood of all human progress. So when we left off, Josh, we were talking about, the little things that we can do in life that start to make creativity happen. Do you have a favorite brainstorming technique that you've used with success time and again?
I do. Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that. So we were talking earlier about fear, and fear is that poisonous force that creeps into our thinking and really robs us and our organization of the big, bold ideas. So here's the idea. Here's my favorite brainstorming technique. It's called role storming. So role storming is brainstorming, but in character. So you're brainstorming as if you're somebody else. So, for example, let's say we were doing a brainstorm session, and it's human nature. You might not share your crazy ideas because you don't want to look foolish or whatever. But if you're role storming and you're playing the role of Steve Jobs, well, no one's going to laugh at Steve for coming up with a big idea. They might laugh at Steve for coming up with a small idea. So now you, a.k.a. Steve, are totally liberated. You can say anything you want, no fear of retribution. So the way the exercise works, you take on a real business problem, like how can I drive an 11% increase in sales next quarter, or how can we hire talented millennials, or whatever you're really facing. But then the folks in the room pick any character they want. So you could be Barack Obama, you could be Oprah Winfrey, you could be Ernest Hemingway, and you take on the persona of somebody else attacking this problem. And just real quickly, I did this once with a group of executives at Sony, and I met this guy who was like the stiffest human being I've ever met. Dark suit, white shirt, tie, stiff as a board. Anyway, we got him role storming as Yoda. And I have never seen personal transformation like this. This guy's jacket's off, his tie's undone, he's leaping around the room. And more importantly, the whiteboards were filled with ideas. And I didn't teach him to become creative. That was inside him all along. And in fact, that's inside all of us. The difference is that the roles that we play in society often forbid those ideas from coming to the surface. So when you role storm, you put yourself in a new role, the ideas start to flow.
I love that. That is because it actually releases you from any obligation to the self,
Yes.
and so, you can let your freak flag fly and nobody's going to criticize you for it.
Yes, exactly. Well said. Let your freak flag fly. Yes.
I love that. Are there common myths about creativity and innovation that you've faced time and again and you've had to overcome?
Yeah, one is that, people say, well, I'm not creative. And as I mentioned, the research is crystal clear. Harvard ran a study, and they asked the age-old question, is creativity born or is it developed? Nature or nurture? And what they found was remarkable. What they found is that creativity is actually 85% learned behavior. Now, if you think about that for a minute, that means you and I, on our groggiest day, have at least 85% the creative capacity as Mozart or Da Vinci or Picasso. Now, compare that, though, unfortunately, to many studies. I've seen studies that show as much as 98% of adults don't identify themselves as a creative person. And so, again, we've been socialized. We've sort of had the creativity beaten out of us as we've grown older. Instead of growing into creativity, we tend to grow out of it. So this myth is that someone says, well, I'm not creative, or, geez, I'm a lawyer. I'm not supposed to be creative. We all can be creative. We can solve problems in creative ways. We can continue to build on our art or in our craft using creativity. So I think that's the biggest one. And the other one is this notion that you're taking on irresponsible risk. As we said earlier, that's not the case at all. You can be very creative and very innovative, and at the same time not take irresponsible risks.
What's the toughest thing you've ever encountered in entering a corporation or anywhere where you've had to really jump over this whole resistance to creativity and innovation?
Well, I think you got to approach it in a systematic way. I think people can get frustrated because, they run into the CEO's office and say, hey, dude, I want to be all creative. And then the CEO calls security. Instead, I think what you have to do is make the case for change. So if you're going to, need some resources or a little bit of rope, you got to say, here's the reason why we're doing it. Here's the consequences. Here's what will happen if we don't try something new. Here's how I'm going to run a controlled experiment where we've got a fixed amount of time and money going against this bet. Here's my expected outcome. So I think if you approach it in a logical, thoughtful way and make it easy for someone to say yes, that's the way to go about it, as opposed to just running down the halls, guns a-blazing.
Do you have another project that you're starting to work on, or is this going to be an evolution of some of the same topic?
Well, I'm very passionate about this, as I'm sure you can tell, and I really believe that we can make huge strides in society and cure a lot of ills by thinking this way. I really believe all of us have this capacity. Mm-hmm. But yes, I do have a new project. I'd love to share it with you. I have a new book coming out, and this is coming out in January. I was looking for a new source of inspiration. There's been so much written on creativity and innovation, and I started thinking, well, who are some of the most creative people in the world? And it led me to hackers. So bear with me for a second. So you think about hackers. Hackers are our biggest threat to national security. It's a big, scary thing, and I'm certainly not glorifying crime. But it's not so easy to hack into a bank. So I look at hacking not so much as good or bad. It's more of a systematic approach, a methodology for complex problem solving. Mm-hmm. So over the last 18 months, I've immersed myself in the dark underbelly cloak and dagger world of hackers, studying their mindsets and their tactics such that I could learn from them, borrow them, and then flip them upside down. So readers of the book can take these mindsets and apply them for legitimate purposes. Like how would a hacker run an insurance company, or how would a hacker run a bank, and for positive purposes. Obviously not to be negative. Yeah. So anyway, the book is called Hacking Innovation, the New Growth Model from the Sinister World of Hackers.
I like that. And, it's a variation on what you were talking about earlier, role storming, right? I mean, that's very really much what you're doing. You're putting yourself in the role of the hacker and then approaching it from that perspective.
Yes, exactly. And I really believe, too, by the way, when I think about hackers, even though they didn't call themselves this, I think that when we look at those who made the biggest amount of history, they were hackers. Martin Luther King was hacking for social injustice, and Thomas Edison was a hacker. And they approached these same mindsets and tactics that I studied and then I ultimately will be sharing in the book.
So I want to ask you a personal question, make a quick little pivot here. In some of the information that I was reading that was sent to me by Goodman Speaker Bureau, you were talking about you're a Detroiter and that you're playing a pivotal role in the turnaround of the city. Can you speak to that? I'm very interested in it.
Sure. Well, I am a very proud Detroiter. I was born in the city of Detroit. My parents and grandparents were born here, so it's a passionate point of mine. This is a city with a soul. Yeah. I wouldn't know that I'm necessarily pivotal. I'm trying hard, and I have a frontline seat. There are many people doing more important things than me, for sure. But I will say this, that our city is a fascinating example of what happens when you embrace this type of thinking, and frankly, what happens when you don't. 100 years ago, Detroit was the Silicon Valley of our country, and that's when we were in this creative groove, and our city prospered. Then what happened? Then we did a 180. Instead of building cool cars, we started administering automotive corporations. And we built these stifling bureaucracies and became involved. We felt like we were entitled to success forever. And subsequently, we got away from our creative roots, and our city really plummeted. And over the last, 40 or so years, we've been a punchline. But today, and you may have seen in the media, the city is rising from the ashes. It's unbelievable what's happening here. This once, deeply challenged city is starting to soar. And I truly believe that this period will be recognized for decades to come as one of the greatest turnarounds in American history. Mm-hmm. I think the reason is because we're reconnecting to those creative roots that put us on the map in the first place. And to me, that's encouraging, because if you're in an organization, you say, gosh, I got so much regulatory burden, and we've got so much baggage and history, and it's too complicated, creativity won't work here. If it can work to turn around a troubled and complex environment like the city of Detroit, it absolutely can work in other situations.
Yeah, but you know what? I think some of this would be known because of people like you, too, who are really taking the reins and on any level and talking about it and trying to make things better. I mean, things don't get better on their own, but if people like you exist and you all start banding together to make a difference, then you see all of those things that you're now talking about the city of Detroit.
Well, that's kind of you to say, and that is what's happening. Again, I don't take credit personally, but there's so many people that are now deeply passionate about Detroit, and we, in the same way we had this sort of perfect storm that all these bad things happen. Now we're kind of having the perfect sunny day. We've got major investors in Detroit. We've got government officials that are legitimate and caring and thoughtful. We've got philanthropic support. So this whole community of creative people are all coming together to help make our city great again, and in fact take it to a new height altogether. together.
That's really fun.
So I would say don't count us out. It's an exciting time in Detroit.
Exactly, and I'm so glad that you're on the front lines of that. So where can people find you? On Twitter at Josh Linkner, Linkner. Where else?
Well, my website, just my name, joshlinkner.com.
Okay.
I write a weekly blog. It's free, of course, but, I've been doing this for 7-8 years. It's a 2 to 3 minute read of an inspiring story or a technique or a tool, and I do it simply because I want to help make the world more creative.
I like that. I like that a lot. Well, thank you for joining us, Josh. I really do appreciate it, and I appreciate all your patience and our getting around to setting this up. It took a little while to make it happen, but I'm very grateful that you hung in with us.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you again, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you. I am Donna Saul. You've been listening to The Greater Good Project. You can follow us on social media at greatergoodpro.com, and we will be back again next week. Thanks for listening.